Some secrets are so heavy, they don't just weigh you down, they become you. They change the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you look at your own husband across the dinner table. And I've seen a lot of secrets walk across my stage over the years, but the one Melanie carried in, well, that one had a life of its own. It was a full-blown entity, a parasite that had attached itself to her soul and was sucking the life out of her, her marriage, and her entire world. When I first read the letter from her husband, Mark, the words practically vibrated with a unique kind of desperation. It wasn't the usual, my wife is cheating, or my teenager is out of control. It was a fog of confusion. He wrote about a woman he loved, a woman who was by all outward appearances a massive success. She'd started a small online boutique that blossomed. She was a social media darling in their community, the mom who always had it together, the wife who seemed to be a true partner in building their dream life. But Mark was living in a house of smoke and mirrors. Money was disappearing. Bills he thought were paid were in collections. He'd get calls from creditors about accounts he didn't even know existed. Every time he'd confront her, she'd have an explanation so slick, so plausible, that he'd walk away feeling like he was the one going crazy. He was being gaslit, of course, but he didn't have the language for it. He just knew the woman he married was vanishing before his eyes, replaced by a defensive, secretive stranger. The label he put on it was financial infidelity. The world might call her a liar, a fraud, but I knew before she even said a word that those labels were just the skin of the onion. The real problem was buried much, much deeper. When she walked out on stage, you could see why everyone was fooled. She was polished, hair perfect, outfit impeccable, a smile that was bright but didn't quite reach her eyes. She carried herself with an air of confidence that was so well rehearsed it was almost believable. Almost. But I've spent over 40 years looking at people, not just listening to them. And her body was telling a different story. The tightness in her jaw, the way her fingers fidgeted with her ring when she thought the camera wasn't on her, the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. This wasn't a confident woman. This was a terrified woman. She wasn't here to solve a problem. She was here for damage control. Her narrative, the story she had built her entire identity on, was crumbling, and she was on my stage to try and patch the walls before the whole house came down. Her central problem wasn't bankruptcy. The debt was a symptom, a massive, life-altering symptom, but a symptom nonetheless. Her real problem was a fundamental and terrifying gap between who she was and who she pretended to be. And she was spending every ounce of her energy and every dollar she could get her hands on to maintain that fiction. The payoff for her behavior was huge. She got to keep the admiration, the perceived success, the identity she was convinced was the only thing that made her worthy of love and respect. The cost, however, was her soul, it was her marriage, it was the truth. And that's a price that no one can afford to pay for long. I knew my job wasn't just to expose the financial lies. My job was to help her find the courage to meet the woman she'd been hiding from her entire life, herself. We started, as we always do, by just talking. Or rather, I listened. Melanie had her story rehearsed. She framed it as a business problem, a cash flow issue. She used words like investment, overhead, and brand building. She was trying to intellectualize a deeply emotional, out-of-control behavior. It's a classic defense mechanism. If you can make it sound like a spreadsheet problem, maybe it doesn't feel like a character flaw. But the numbers didn't lie. And her husband, sitting next to her, looking like the life had been drained out of him, was the living embodiment of the emotional fallout. I let her talk for a while. I needed to hear the narrative she told herself, the one that allowed her to sleep at night. In her version, She was a savvy entrepreneur hitting a rough patch. She was the hero of her own story, sacrificing for the good of the family's future. The problem was the story was fiction. The business wasn't just in a rough patch, it was a black hole, and it had been for years. She was selling a $50 blouse and spending $500 to stage the photo for social media. The payoff wasn't profit, it was the likes, the comments, the DMs saying, "I wish I had your life." She wasn't building a business, she was funding an addiction to external validation. I stopped her mid-sentence. "Melanie," I said, "let's put the business aside for a minute. Let's talk about you. Tell me about the little girl you used to be. What was the message about money and success in your house growing up?" That's when I saw the first real crack in the facade. Her shoulders tensed, her eyes darted over to Mark, then back to me. The polished CEO disappeared, and for a second, I saw that scared little girl. Her story, when it finally came out, was textbook. It wasn't a story of overt abuse or trauma in the way people usually think of it. It was quieter, more insidious. She grew up in a home that was financially precarious but pathologically obsessed with appearances. Her father worked a blue-collar job and was proud but constantly worried. Her mother was the social director, a woman whose entire sense of self-worth was tied to what the neighbors thought. They were house poor. They had a nice-looking home in a good neighborhood, but the lights would get shut off. They drove a decent car, but there were days there wasn't enough food in the fridge. The defining emotion of her childhood was shame. The shame of a free lunch ticket at school, the shame of wearing a cousin's hand-me-down dress to a party, the shame of her mother's frantic anxiety before any guests came over. The message she internalized was simple and devastating. Who we are is not enough. What we have is what matters. The image is everything. So she learned to perform. She learned to fake it. She became a master of creating an illusion of effortless perfection. This wasn't born from malice. It was born from a deep, desperate need to belong, to not be the poor kid, to never, ever feel that hot sting of shame again. When she met Mark, he was everything her childhood wasn't. Stable, secure, transparent. You'd think that would have been a relief, a safe harbor. But for someone with her programming, it was a threat. She didn't feel worthy of it. She felt like an imposter who was going to be found out at any moment. So she did what she had always done. She started performing. She had to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect success story to earn her place in this stable life she so desperately wanted but didn't believe she deserved. Mark, for his part, loved the performance. He was proud of her. He'd bragged to his friends about his wife's booming business. He didn't ask too many questions about the finances because, on some level, he didn't want to know. He was complicit in the fantasy because it made him feel good too. He was a co-pilot in the flight from reality. The boutique was the perfect storm. It gave her a legitimate reason to spend a public stage on which to perform her success. Every like was a hit of validation. Every sale, no matter how unprofitable, was proof that she wasn't that little girl with the free lunch ticket anymore. She wasn't just running from her past, she was trying to bury it under a mountain of invoices and shipping boxes. And the hole she was digging was about to swallow them both. The thing about a secret like this is that it's a living organism. It has to be fed. And its food is more lies. It starts small. You hide a credit card statement, then you have to open a PO box to have the statements for the next card sent there. Then you're intercepting the mail. Then you're creating fake invoices to prove your business is profitable. It's a full-time job, and the CEO of this job is fear, the fear of being found out. As Mark began to talk, the full scope of this escalation became painfully clear. This wasn't a recent problem. This had been going on for years. A slow, steady bleed that had recently turned into a hemorrhage. He recounted the first time he caught her in a significant lie. She had told him she had landed a major contract with a local chain of boutiques. They celebrated. He was so proud, he told his family, his friends. It was the proof he needed that her hard work was paying off, that the long hours and the stress were worth it. He'd even suggested she use some of their savings to buy inventory in bulk to meet the new demand. She agreed, of course. The money vanished. But the inventory never seemed to quite materialize in the way he expected. When he asked, she'd say it was stored at a small warehouse or that it was on back order. The excuses were always plausible. But then one day, he ran into the owner of that boutique chain at a hardware store. He went up to him, shook his hand, and said, "I'm Mark, Melanie's husband. Just wanted to say how thrilled we are about the partnership." And the man just looked at him with a completely blank stare. He had no idea what Mark was talking about. He said he'd met Melanie once at a trade show, but that was it. You could see the pain of that memory play out on Mark's face right there on my stage. It's a unique kind of hurt, the realization that you haven't just been lied to, you've been made a fool of. You've been enlisted as an unwitting co-conspirator and a fraud against yourself. When he confronted Melanie with this, she didn't confess, she attacked, she accused him of not believing in her, of trying to sabotage her, of being jealous of her success. It was a master class in blame shifting. He walked away from that fight feeling confused and guilty, even though he was the one who had been lied to. That's the insidious power of gaslighting. It makes you question your own reality. From there, the lies got bigger and bolder. She took out a second mortgage on their home by forging his signature on the documents. She drained their children's college savings accounts, telling herself she'd pay it all back when the business finally took off. She was running a Ponzi scheme against her own family. The money from one secret loan was used to make the minimum payment on a secret credit card, all while she posted photos online of a new designer handbag or a weekend getaway she'd earned. On stage, as Mark laid this all out, calmly and with a devastating sadness, Melanie's composure finally shattered. The tears started, but they weren't the tears of remorse. Not yet. They were the tears of a cornered animal. "He's making it sound so sinister," she said, her voice choked with indignation. "I was doing it for us. I was building something. I just needed more time. If he had just trusted me." I had to cut her off. "Trusted you?" I asked, keeping my voice very calm. "Melanie, trust isn't a gift, it's an outcome. It's the result of trustworthy behavior. You were engaged in a systematic, long-term pattern of deception. You didn't make a mistake. You made thousands of choices. Every single day, you chose the lie over the truth. You chose the illusion over your husband. You chose the validation of strangers on the internet over the sanctity of your home." We need to be very clear about that. This wasn't a business plan that went wrong. This was an addiction that was running your life. The final straw for Mark came when a man showed up at their door to serve foreclosure papers. The second mortgage she'd taken out had gone into default. The whole house of cards was coming down, and it was threatening to take their actual house with it. That was the moment the fog lifted for him. It wasn't about bookkeeping anymore. It wasn't about a struggling business. This was a crisis on a scale he couldn't comprehend, and he knew he couldn't fix it alone. Writing to the show wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of desperation. He loved his wife, but he didn't know the woman sitting next to him. He was there to find out if the woman he married was still in there somewhere, buried under all that debt and deception. This is the point in the process where things get real. The backstory is understood. The escalation is laid bare. Now, you have to confront the core truth. The cameras, the audience, They all fade away. It becomes a very intimate, very direct conversation. I turned my chair to face her directly, creating a closed circuit between the two of us. Mark had said his piece. Now it was her turn to face the music, not his, but her own. Melanie, I started my voice intentionally softer but more direct. Let's stop talking about Mark. Let's stop talking about the business. Let's talk about you. What are you so afraid of? She immediately went back to her script. I'm not afraid. I'm just overwhelmed. It got bigger than I expected. No, I said, cutting through the noise. I'm not asking about the logistics. I'm asking about the feeling. The feeling in the pit of your stomach at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're all alone with these secrets. What is that feeling? Give it a name. She looked away. She couldn't meet my eyes. This is a critical moment. The avoidance tells you everything. She was avoiding the feeling just like she was avoiding the truth. I waited. The silence on a television stage is deafening, and I let it hang there, creating a vacuum that she had to fill. Finally, a whisper. Terror? Terror of what? I pressed gently. Of being a failure? She said the words barely audible. And what does being a failure mean to you? Let's get specific. If you fail, what happens? Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were different. The anger was gone. The indignation had dissolved. What was left was raw, unfiltered pain. It means I'm that little girl again, she sobbed, the polished facade crumbling into dust. It means everyone will see that I'm not good enough, that I never was, that I'm just trash. I'm the kid with the free lunch ticket. And there it was, the core belief, the poison pill she'd swallowed as a child and had been living with ever since. It's what we call a taped message in psychology. An irrational, deeply embedded belief from childhood that plays on a loop in the background of your adult life, dictating your choices her entire life. This multi-million-dollar web of lies wasn't about building a future. It was about running from a past. It was about outrunning the ghost of a little girl who felt worthless. So every designer handbag, I said, connecting the dots for her, every staged photo, every like you got on social media, that was all just a desperate attempt to tell yourself, see, I'm not her. I'm not that little girl anymore. Is that right? She nodded, unable to speak, her whole body shaking with the force of her sobs. This is the breakthrough. It's not a single moment of screaming and yelling. It's a moment of profound, painful clarity. It's the moment a person finally stops fighting the truth and allows it to wash over them. But clarity isn't enough. Now you have to confront the consequences. I want you to look at your husband, I said. Look at this man who loves you, who sat here next to you while you lied to his face, to my face, to the world. The pain you caused him was not theoretical, Melanie. It's real. You didn't just break his trust, you weaponized it. You used his love and his pride in you as a shield for your deception. You forged his name. You stole your children's future. Do you understand the magnitude of that betrayal? She turned to Mark, and for the first time, I think she truly saw him. Not as an obstacle to her secrets, not as an audience for her performance, but as a man she had deeply, profoundly wounded. I'm so sorry, she whispered, the words choked and inadequate. Mark just looked at her, his own eyes welling up. He didn't offer false comfort. He didn't say, it's okay. He just nodded, letting her apology land, letting the reality of the damage sit between them. Sorry is a start, I said, bringing the focus back, but sorry isn't a plan. The fantasy is over. Your business, as you've been running it, is done. It's not a business. It's a symptom of your disease. The addiction to validation, the compulsive spending, the pathological lying. Today is the day you have to choose. You can choose to keep feeding that disease, and I guarantee you, you will lose everything. Your husband, your children, your home, your self-respect. Or you can choose to turn and fight for your life, to fight for the truth, to fight for the woman you were meant to be before that little girl got the message that she wasn't good enough. So what's it going to be? Which path do you want to be on? The question hung in the air. This was her moment of accountability. All the excuses, all the blame shifting, all the lies had been stripped away. All that was left was a choice. Her choice wasn't a dramatic, made-for-TV declaration. It was quieter, more fragile. It was in the way she finally, completely let go. The tension in her shoulders released, and she seemed to sink into the chair, exhausted from years of holding up a false front. I don't know how, she said, her voice raw. I don't know who I am without it. Without the business, without the image. If I'm not that person, who am I? That's the best question you've asked all day, I told her, because that's the beginning of your recovery. For years, you've been answering that question with a lie. I'm a successful entrepreneur. I'm a style icon. I'm the woman who has it all. And it was all a house of cards. The truth is, right now, you're a woman who is in a massive amount of trouble. You're a wife who has betrayed her husband. You're a mother who has jeopardized her children's future. And you're a person with a disease, an addiction to spending and deception that has brought you to your knees. That's the truth of who you are today. And it's from that place of brutal honesty, and only from that place, that you can begin to build something real. This is where the work truly begins. The confrontation on stage is the diagnosis, the surgery, but the healing, the recovery that happens day by day, choice by choice, in the quiet moments of real life, we set up a plan for them right there. It wasn't about a quick fix. It was about building a whole new foundation. First, total financial transparency. No more secret accounts, no more hidden statements. Every single penny had to be accounted for. I connected them with a nonprofit credit counseling service, professionals who could look at the gargantuan pile of debt and help them create a realistic plan. This would involve bankruptcy, a word Melanie couldn't even bring herself to say earlier. It would mean liquidation, selling the assets of the business, the designer clothes, the photography equipment, anything that wasn't nailed down to pay back a fraction of what they owed. It meant facing the shame she had spent her entire life running from. She would have to stand in bankruptcy court. She would have to see her name in public filings. The illusion of success wouldn't just be gone, it would be publicly dismantled. Second, intensive therapy, both individually and as a couple. For her, it was about getting to the root of that core belief that she was worthless. It was about developing a sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to external validation. It meant finding the courage to be ordinary, to be imperfect, and to believe that she was still worthy of love. For Mark, therapy was about processing the betrayal. It was about learning to trust again, not just her, but his own judgment. He had to explore his own role in enabling the fantasy, why he was so willing to believe the performance without asking the hard questions. Couples therapy for them wasn't going to be about saving the marriage, not at first. It was about creating a safe space to communicate honestly, perhaps for the first time in their entire relationship. Saving the marriage would be a byproduct of them both getting healthy if it was meant to be. I made it clear to Mark that he didn't have to stay. He had every right to walk away. His only job was to get healthy himself and make the best decision for him and his children. Third, a support system. I insisted Melanie join a support group for spending addiction, something like Debtors Anonymous. She needed to be in a room with other people who understood the obsession, the compulsion, the shame. She needed to know she wasn't alone, and she needed to be held accountable by people who would see right through her old tricks. Her addiction thrived in isolation and secrecy. Recovery would only happen in community and honesty. The outcome of a story like this is never a neat little bow. It's messy and it's real. I followed up with them 3 months later, and then again at the 6-month mark. The first few weeks were hell. The bankruptcy was humiliating for her, just as I knew it would be. Creditors called constantly. They had to sell their house and move into a small rental apartment. The shame she had run from her whole life had finally caught up and was now her constant companion. Mark told me there were days he came home from work and found her just sitting on the floor, crying, completely paralyzed by the weight of it all. There were times he wanted to leave, times when the anger and resentment felt overwhelming, but they were both doing the work. She was going to her meetings every week. She was showing up for therapy, even when it was painful. He was in his own therapy, learning to set boundaries and express his anger in a healthy way. They were talking, really talking. They had business meetings every Sunday night where they went over every single dollar spent that week, right down to the last pack of gum. It was agonizing, but it was honest. It was the slow, tedious work of rebuilding trust from the ground up. The most telling moment came during our 6-month follow-up call. Melanie told me about running into one of the social media moms from her old life at the grocery store. The woman looked at Melanie's simple clothes, her modest cart of groceries, and with a kind of pitying condescension said, "Oh, honey, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry you lost everything." And Melanie said that for a split second, the old shame washed over her. But then something else happened. She looked the woman in the eye and said, "Actually, I didn't lose everything. I'm just starting to find the things that matter." That's it. That's the whole ball game right there. She hadn't changed her circumstances. She had changed her perspective. She was redefining success. It was no longer about a curated Instagram feed. It was about a conversation with her husband that didn't involve a lie. It wasn't about a designer handbag. It was about being able to look her children in the eye without a knot of guilt in her stomach. It was a long, hard road ahead. I don't know if their marriage will ultimately survive, but for the first time, Melanie wasn't running. She was standing still in the rubble of the life she had built on lies, and she was finally, painfully, starting to build a life based on the truth. She hadn't reached a happy ending, but she had reached an honest beginning. And in the real world, that's more than enough. It's everything.